Hi, this is Benita Gonzalez. I am the Director of Support for Students with Exceptionalities for the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston and Support for Nurses and Counselors. I am doing a recorded narration today on our counselor meeting that was held on September 11th, 2019. This will be my first for the counselors meeting. Prior, I did one for the nurses meeting as well. Let us get started. So before we begin, here is our meeting agenda, some of the pieces that we reviewed at our counselors meeting on September 11th. We reviewed the counselor verification form, volunteers, third parties. We talked a little bit about sensory items. We did review some school guidance and counseling program information that we previously had discussed on August 6th in service. Also, Catholic Charities, our biggest piece on our counselor meeting was Trauma Training 101. This is a very similar trauma training that was previously composed at our principal workshop meeting in July of 2019. And also exit tickets and future meetings have being held for our counselors throughout this 2019-2020 school year. If you feel that you want to head over to one of these areas, you can definitely move forward by hitting the forward button and locating the area in the agenda where you'd like to look at. But if not, we're going to start in the very beginning. So counselor verification form, so I sent this out to all counselors within the Archdiocese. This counselor verification form is once every year, so this is the 2019-2020 school year one. It is a fillable file. You may print it and sign, the school counselor needs to sign their signature at the bottom and date it and email it back to me, Benita Gonzalez at bgonzalez@archgh.org. I utilize this information so I can see when the last CMG training or Virtue State was, any kind. This year I asked about counseling resources used at their school. I'm going to use some of that information within our guidance program that we're working on currently right now in renewal. I'm also seeing what kind of counselor we have on hand, if it's a licensed counselor or a TEA certified school counselor, or if it's a counselor with a master's degree currently being held, and in what area of mental health is that being held on. And again, if we have a licensed counselor that has a clinical internship with a supervisor, needing that name and phone number in case there's any other questions throughout the school year. We also discussed volunteers and third parties, as we did with our nurses meeting as well. I also did it with and discussed this with our counselors. We talked about if anyone is coming on campus, if it's going to be a tutor, someone from HISD or any ISD, a therapist, anyone coming on campus to perform any kind of service for the students, whether it be academic, occupational, therapeutic, whatever the case may be, there are certain documents we need for those entities. Of course, contact me, Benita Gonzalez. You may email me, bgonzalez@archgh.org, to review some of those pieces before anyone steps foot on your campus. You want to make sure you have all proper documentations, all insurance and liabilities, all your boxes checked before these entities start working on your campuses with students. We also discussed sensory items. So I provided some of these sensories that you see on this slide with, I gave them as a gift to our counselors this year. So just little wonderful little pieces. Some call them fidgets, others call them sensory items. So for the most part, things to keep the body occupied in order for focus in an academic school setting. So I also provided the counselors with what I have currently, what's called a sensory item agreement. So as we know with sensory items, they can get a little disruptive if not used appropriately. Some sensory items, I think you all remember the fidget spinner, where the spinners were going and going and going, and some of them even came up with light up spinners. Some of them were becoming a little distracting because they started having noises with them. Kids started throwing them across the room. So there wasn't really and truly a good set rule for many of these things. So just made sure I created a small little sensory item agreement. So I'm going to read a little bit about it. So the sensory item, a tool a student uses to keep their body occupied in order to focus during the academic school day. It should not distract the user or classmates. If used inappropriately, the sensory item is removed. So this is basically and then the student's name, promise to use my sensory item during blank to help me keep my body busy and my brain focused. If my teacher or any school personnel notices I am 1, distracted by the sensory item, 2, distracting my classmates with a sensory item, or 3, using the sensory item inappropriately, then the sensory item will be removed and may not be used again in school. Usually we have parents sign this and students, because the sensory item, when it's taken up, it's given back to parents to keep at home. And again, we're wanting the student to be productive at school. We don't want it to be a distraction or also a disruption at school. That's not what sensory items are for. It is more to support with focus. And again, there's so many of them out there, so just wanting to make sure that clear rules are set and there's a clear agreement with the sensory pieces. We also reviewed the counseling and guidance program. Some of you may have seen the guidance program for the Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. We do have a 2-pager defining what a guidance counseling program is, and also the general components of a guidance program, and also knowledge and skills within the following areas of guidance and counseling as well. Again, I reviewed this piece with many of the counselors on August 6th during our in-service. We went extensively through each area and each skill. So I just reiterated it a little bit more during our guidance counseling, our counseling meeting, just so everyone was on the same page and we can definitely have further discussions, because what's happening right now is our counselor leadership committee. I do have a counselor leadership committee that consists of counselors within the Archdiocese and also one outside entity, which at this moment is Catholic Charities, who's supporting us with information and the outside source. But they are all working currently on the guidance and counseling and guidance program and curriculum. Just kind of reviewing what we currently have, seeing what are some things that need a little bit of adjusting and possibly changing. So those are some things that we are currently working on right now to develop for hopefully the 2020-2021 school year. But again, it is a pretty lengthy process, so we just want to make sure we do it thoroughly and we do it to the best of our ability so we can get it out properly to all the schools and provide proper training. Another thing we reviewed is the handbook review. So right now, I asked all the counselors to look in their parent handbook and their school handbook to review what language do you currently have about your counseling and guidance program. Some did not have any language in their handbooks, so I provided them with a couple of options. And then again, these can be adopted to make sure they meet your school needs. So a couple of these I obtained from current handbooks in schools currently right now in our Archdiocese. Others was created, and again, I changed up some of the names, so I didn't leave the school's name on there. So a couple of options. I do have a couple of options for the school to review, and again, to adopt as needed. But every school in the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston should have some type of information in their handbook on their counseling and guidance program. We also reviewed on lesson plans. So we talked about the 7 areas, and I'm going to go over some of those 7 areas here in a little bit as well. So as you may see, here's just a typical lesson plan template on what most teachers usually see and what most guidance counselors will see as well. They asked, where do we document, because many of them had gone through accreditation and have been told to document their guidance curriculum or their guidance knowledge and skill. And they were asking, and they being the counselors were asking, where do we do that? And I told them you would do that on a lesson plan. So it would look very similar to this. You'd have a space and you have an area where you would document one of the 7 areas, again, 7 knowledge and skills that I'm going to go over here in a little bit of the guidance program for the Catholic Schools Office in the Archdiocese Galveston-Houston. And being the Director of Support for Students with Exceptionalities, I also pointed out that you should also have an area where you document your accommodations for learners with diagnosed with certain disabilities, special needs, students that are English language learners, and of course those students that have high IQ. So you should have an area in your lesson plan where you're documenting that as well. Now, here are the 7 areas. So currently right now, if you review the guidance program for the Archdiocese Galveston-Houston, there are 7 different areas that should be documented on lesson plans that teachers are currently working on in their classrooms. The 7 areas are self-esteem, motivation to achieve, decision-making, goal-setting, planning, and problem-solving, interpersonal effectiveness, communication skills, cross-cultural effectiveness, and responsible behavior. Underneath these 7 areas, there are subcomponents to it. For example, self-esteem development have accurate self-concepts, value their uniqueness, manage their feelings. And then we have motivation to achieve. Their sublets are develop their academic potential, take advantage of educational opportunities, choose careers that will allow them to fulfill their potential, develop leadership skills. Decision-making, goal-setting, planning, and problem-solving. That sublet is make decisions, develop plans of action, set goals, gather information, solve problems, manage change, manage transition from one school level to the next. Interpersonal effectiveness is sublets of respect others, relate well with others, maintain their personal integrity while participating effectively in groups, develop healthy friendships, function effectively as a group member. Communication skills. Sublet is understand basic communication skills, express themselves, listen to others. Cross-cultural effectiveness. The sublets are appreciate their culture, respect others as individuals, and accept them for their cultural membership. Relate effectively with others based on appreciation for differences, similarities, and cultural membership. Realize how stereotyping affects them and their relationship with others. And lastly, responsible behavior. Sublets are behave responsibly, take responsibility for own behaviors, and be self-disciplined. So these are currently the 7 areas we currently have. And again, this is something we are working on, and when I say we, the Counselor Leadership Committee is working on to look over, review, refine, just trying to make sure that this is what we're going to proceed on for the upcoming year. So we're looking at this for possible renewal, seeing if we need to change any of the language within our guidance program to be more effective as well within our classrooms. Another question that was asked at the counselors meeting was, is it the counselor's responsibility to be just the guidance program in each school? Absolutely not. Now, a counselor, of course, is wonderful expertise to support teachers and staff members on how to implement these 7 areas in their classrooms. But again, the counselor should not be the only one working on guidance programs. It shouldn't just be a counselor coming in and doing a presentation on one of these 7 areas and then going on to the next class, because then that just becomes an ancillary classroom. You want to make sure that the teacher is integrating it. That's why the lesson plans are there. Of course, the teacher may ask the counselor to come in and do a presentation. Then by that moment, the counselor is then more of a role model, showing the teacher, reviewing certain lesson plans with the teacher to see how it can be more effective. Again, effective guidance program is working in collaboration with teachers. So I hope your teachers and your counselors are working together to try and work on these 7 areas currently. And again, if there's any changes, if there's any renewals, we'll definitely have those discussions as the year progresses and as we progress with information from our Counselor Leadership Committee. And lastly, Catholic Charities came in. We want to thank him so much for coming out and providing the Trauma Training 101 to our counselors. The Trauma Training 101 was directed straight to our counselors with a lot of counseling components. So we want to just make sure, first and foremost, thank them for coming out. And those who came out were Jennifer Santos, Gabriela Tornero. Jennifer Santos is a licensed clinical social worker and certified clinical trauma professional. She is head lead for Catholic Charities on school-based counseling. And Gabriela Tornero is a licensed professional counseling intern, nationally board certified, and a certified clinical trauma professional. So these 2 wonderful individuals came out to support our counselors and also train them in Trauma 101. Now, a little bit about Trauma 101 training. What kind of training did the counselors receive? And that is always a wonderful, wonderful question, because as principals, we want to know what goals were set out, what learning objectives came out of it. So a couple of goals is, one of the goals of the Trauma Training 101 was to educate these counselors in the community about the impact of trauma on the development and behavior of children. And also to educate the counselors about when and how to intervene directly in a trauma-sensitive manner and through trauma-focused referrals. And lastly, making the counselors aware of and know how to access timely, quality, and effective trauma-focused interventions. Some of the learning objectives of the Trauma Training 101 were participants were able to understand the term child traumatic stress and how and what types of experiences constitute child trauma. Also, all the participants were able to understand the relationship between a child's lifetime trauma history and his or her behaviors and responses. The counselors were able to understand how traumatic experiences affect the brain development and memory as well as child development. The counselors were able to understand the importance of collaboration with agencies that promote a lot of trauma-informed practices. And also, the counselors were able to recognize the importance of trauma-informed practices as well. So it was wonderful training. We also told the counselors that many of the principals went through the Trauma 101 training as well in July at our principals workshop meeting. It was wonderful for them to live what was happening as well, but also get informed with their own expertise as well. Lastly, we reviewed the counselor future meeting dates. We have 4 in all, but we have 3 of them coming up. Our next one will be November 20th, and then we have one February 12th. That's a double asterisk because we have the nurses and counselors together. And then the last one is May 6th. So it'll be the last one for the year for the counselors. Now, I did have all the counselors complete exit tickets, so I will complete exit Q&As and send those out separately in a separate email. But if you have any questions for me, you may contact me at any time. Again, there's my direct line, 713-391-2630, or you may email me at bgonzalez@archgh.org. Thank you again for being with me today, and again, if you have any questions, contact me at any time. Have a blessed day.